Welcome to part 2 of chapter 2's PowerPoint on the art and architecture of the ancient Near East. We're going to start this time by visiting Babylon. So this is Babylonian culture, our first look at it. So Babylonian culture reunited Sumer under Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a political leader. He wrote the law code, and the power of the kingship grew under Hammurabi. This is the stele of Hammurabi, and so it's another standing stone. This one has an inscription and an image, and they're quite separate. So the images are up at the top, and the inscription is below them. So this entire bottom piece that you see here is inscribed in the cuneiform writing, and it is Hammurabi's law code. So at the very top, though, we have an image of Hammurabi and the deity Shamash. I think we're going to look at that. Here is the actual stone, so you can see how big it is. And yeah, I have a human standing next to it in the museum. So here's the top that shows Hammurabi visiting with Shamash, the deity. And you can also see the writing here. You can see how tiny it is. So I want to point out a few things of interest. So let's look at the person of Hammurabi first. And you can see, I think, that he's got a very long dressed beard, kind of like the earlier Sumerian men. But like Gudea, he's got this little brimmed cap on his head. And he's wearing a wrapped garment, not the fringed garments. The deity, Shamash, is seated on a throne, and he's wearing a tiered garment, but he has a very long dressed beard. He's also wearing a horned crown. So this headdress that he has and those lines going around it are actually horns, and they wrap around the sides. This has 4 horns, so he has 4 sets of horns on it. And just notice the scale of these figures. So their heads are about even. Hammurabi's head is a little bit higher than Shamash here. But if Shamash stood up, he would tower over Hammurabi. So we have that hierarchic scale going on where the god is much more important than the human. But there's a message here. There's also a more important message than that. And that is the implication of this scene where Hammurabi is wanting the people who see this to believe that he has had a conversation with the deity. Perhaps he's even suggesting that the laws inscribed in the stela down below have come from Shamash. They've not come from Hammurabi. So this implies that divine right of kings, that Hammurabi sits on the throne, Hammurabi rules because Shamash so wills it. And if you mess with Hammurabi, if you mess with the laws, if you choose not to obey them, then ultimately you're going to have to deal with Shamash. So there's a lot of powerful political message in this image. It's not just a recording of, it's certainly not a recording of anything real that happened. So that's Babylonian culture. And we will return. Babylon will be revived, but now we're going to move on and look at Assyrian culture, which I think is pretty interesting. So the Assyrians were known for their incredibly strong army and their ruthlessness as a military force. Anyway, the Assyrians from about 1000 to 612, so we're moving closer and closer to modern times. This people grew powerful in the north, and they adopted the ziggurat form for their temples. Most of the art from this time, however, is secular. So they made ziggurats, they made temples, but they really put their attention and their effort into their secular art, and it showed their political power. So we're going to see several images of this. And I think that's the big idea here, is that we've moved away from the Sumerians, where what survives from their culture is a lot of religious art, and we've moved into an era of more secular and political art. So this figure that is on the screen here is a lamassu, sometimes called lamassus, and they're hybrid figures where they have the head of a man and the body of either a bull or a lion, uh, and wings. So it's got three different creatures going on here, and you can tell by the feet that this is a lion's body. And look at his headdress. It's like the one that Shamash was wearing in the Babylonian stele of Hammurabi. This lamassu has three horns wrapping around. And look also at his beard and his wings. They're all carved with lots of little fine details. This is sort of one of the characteristics of the Assyrian sculptures and relief sculptures, is there's lots and lots of little carved details. So this is carved of alabaster, which is a stone, and they're very well preserved as well. So let's see, I happen to like lamassus really well, so I have several images. Here's one that is the hybrid with the body of a bull, so you can see by his feet that he has bull's hooves, and this creature only has two pairs of horns wrapping around his head. So lamassu were placed at entrances, and they flanked the openings, and this shows a pair in situ, meaning in their original position. An opening, I don't know what's going on back there, but anybody entering the palace, where the king or the ruler would be, would have to pass between the two lamassu, and they were protecting spirits. So they were thought to be there to keep evil and evildoers out of the inner sanctum where the king resided. And you can see their huge size as well, so they would be very scary. Now look at the one on the left. It has 5 visible legs. Students have asked me about this in the past, so I have to talk about it. If you look at the lamassu from head on, he would look like he's got his 2 front legs just firmly placed on the ground, as though he's strong and unmoving. But when you come around the side, you can see he appears to be striding from a profile view. I'm sure people have written more about that. I just haven't read it, but I'm just pointing it out. So lamassus always have 5 legs. And this is some fan art at a mall in the south side of Los Angeles. The mall's called the Citadel, and they had these electronic billboards that have lamassu on top of them. Sorry, when I see things like that, I have to record it. So here's some of the relief sculpture. This is kind of typical. Usually relief sculptures are meant to show something important about the person who lives in the building that they're on. So this was on the palace of Assurbanipal, and his palace was in Nineveh. It was decorated with low relief panels of alabaster. This scene depicts a victory celebration where the king and queen are attended by servants. So I hope you can see that here in the center is the king, and you can tell him by his beard. He's reclining on a kind of a high couch, but he's drinking. He's holding up a cup to drink. His wife is sitting here on a chair next to him. She's also got a cup. And their servants are standing around with fans fanning them to keep them cool. You can tell it's a peaceful time because his bow is resting over here on a table. That is his weapon. And you clearly don't need your weapon around when you're relaxing and having dinner with the wife. Over here is the head that was talked about, so it's sort of dangling from a tree, but that shows probably one of the spoils of war, that he took the head and then he went home to have dinner. This one is pretty typical, actually. This is Asurnasirpal II killing lions. And the message here is that this king, this ruler, is very strong. He is stronger, in fact, than the strongest animal in the animal kingdom. And he's riding on his chariot. You can see his overlapping horses. It's pulled by 3 horses. One lion has been badly wounded by arrows and looks like it's in the throes of death under the hooves of the horse. And back behind Asurnasirpal, there's another lion with his 4 paws up on the chariot, his mouth wide open. But if you look at Asurnasirpal, he's not at all afraid. He is bravely confronting the lion with his bow, ready to shoot him to kill. Behind the lion, we've got some chasers, some men with it looks like symbols and other things to make sure that the lion moves into range of Asurnasirpal. The artist here has condensed everything, has moved everything close together so that it would fit on the panel. I'm sure in real life, the men with the symbols would be much further behind the lion, and the lion himself would probably not be that close to Asurnasirpal. But the thing I love about the Assyrian relief carvings is just all the attention to detail. They're just so beautiful and so crisp and clean. They've survived really well. Now, moving on from Assyrian to our revival of Babylonian culture. So this is considered Neo-Babylonian, and this is Babylon, gives the culture its name. The culture, this is the culture that sacked Jerusalem. So that whole event in their history is recorded by the Jews in the Hebrew Scriptures, also known as the Old Testament. So they took the Jews hostage in what's called the Babylonian captivity. And the leader, the Neo-Babylonian leader at that time, was Nebuchadnezzar, and he ruled from 604 to 562 BCE. So that gives you a little bit of context, those of you who were raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So this shows Babylon, and this is a reconstruction drawing of a monument that was discovered by archaeologists and removed from the site of the excavation. But this is an imaginary view of the city of Babylon. So you can see it looks like a city, very large. There's a very wide avenue here and this beautiful gate over the avenue. It was believed to be made for procession, so you can see the imaginary procession down here going through the gate. Ishtar was the goddess of love and war. And the gate is decorated with tiles. I'll show you some more pictures in a minute, but all of these animals were sacred to the goddess Ishtar. So the wide avenue was made for processions. And then over here on the right side, you can see an artist imagining what the hanging gardens of Babylon looked like. It was one of the wonders of the world, the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And nobody knows what they would have looked like because, of course, any gardens died. So there's no evidence. And back in the back is a ziggurat with a temple on top for the patron god of Babylon, which is Marduk. So let's move on. So I told you that the gate was discovered, it was dismantled, it was moved into a museum in Berlin, Germany, where you can go see it today. So it's fabulous installation. And I have some more pictures, scale pictures to show you. So here's the gate with these animals sacred to Ishtar. And over here, just some decorative motifs, some lions down here. And there's the gate, and there's me standing in front of it, so you can get a sense of scale. So it looks, pretty wide. I'd say maybe 10 feet across. So a lot of people could march through there. And these are all glazed ceramic tiles, and the animals, in fact, are slightly raised from the ground to make them kind of in relief. And here's another reconstruction. Somebody else imagined a parade with some floats or carriages going through the gate. And in the museum in Berlin, somebody built a scale model of the street leading up to the Ishtar Gate. So there it is back there, and this is what they think the street might have looked like. And here's an example of this kind of tile work that was glazed. Now this is really old, so it's not going to look like it did originally, but you can see that these are bricks and they would have been glazed with different color and additional clay added to mold out the relief of this body of the lion. The Persians obtained independence in 549 under Cyrus II the Great. Darius I and his successors were known as the Achaemenids, and their rule lasted for nearly 2 centuries. They developed fair taxation, standard currency, and improved communication. The new capital, Persepolis, was built starting in about 515 BCE in a multicultural style of art. It combined Persian, Median, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Greek elements. And by the way, in case you couldn't figure it out, we've now moved away from Mesopotamia over into Persia. I showed you that on the map. Persia today is known as Iran. So the only monument we're going to look at here in any depth is Persepolis. And it's a huge palace complex that was constructed by Darius I and his successors. So we're going to look at the Apadana over here. So there's like several different structures and buildings, and we're going to look at this one. Just notice these big columns that are sticking up. These originally would have supported a roof. And so this was a huge, huge building. All of these are little stumps of columns that would have been also tall and supporting the roof. And this is that courtyard, the stairs, the ramp over here that you saw in this picture is right here. So just notice a few things, that there are several registers that depict soldiers. So this would be a visual representation of the Persian army. So anybody coming into the palace would be made aware that even though you couldn't see the actual soldiers, they exist, and they're represented here by these images. And there's lots of those. More down here, and these soldiers have these strange little helmets. I'll show you some more of those, and they have weapons as well. Lots of pictures of Persepolis. So on the right is some of the standing columns that are still there with their capitals on them. And here's one on the left from a museum, just the capital. And it shows here these 2 animals, these horned animals, how a beam of wood would have rested in between them. So the columns would go up, and each capital would support a beam that would stretch across here, and then the roof would rest on those beams. So very, very ingenious, but also decorative. And here's one of the reliefs there of Darius II and Xerxes II. So Darius II was ruling when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. So that also gives you a little context. And we'll talk about Alexander when we get to Greece. So at the top is another parade of these figures. I mean, there's just so many at Persepolis. And you can see them with their weapons and their shields and holding hands to show their unity. And down below is an imagined polychromy of the figures, because somebody has theorized that they once all were painted. And on the right is a picture I took in a museum of a figure just like this man here, with his kind of feathered headdress and his short curly hair and his nice beard. Now, Persepolis is in such a state of ruin, thanks to Alexander the Great and the years that have passed since then, that a lot of people have wanted to see it reconstructed. So some artists have done some computer generated reconstructions. So I'm just showing these so you can get more of a sense of the grandeur of Persepolis. So this is an imagined gateway with two guardian bulls. They are not lamassus, they are just bulls, but also with a lot of carving on their bodies. And it could be meant to be this gate over here. And this is that Apadana that I showed you. So somebody imagined all of the columns up there supporting their beams and their roof and putting it all together. History tells us that Alexander burnt it down when he conquered Persia. So that's where we are. And this is another view. I think it's another artist's imaginary reconstruction of the same place, the Apadana. Only this one included a pool of water just before it, which would be quite a miraculous thing to see here. Some more details. On the right is the image of Darius II from a Roman mosaic that was supposedly made from a Greek painting. So, so many versions of that. But it shows Darius in the battle where Alexander conquered him. And on the left is an actual Persian helmet from a museum. So you can kind of see how it curls over on the top. So you can sort of get that similarity in the mosaic on the right. I'll show you this mosaic several times in this class. And some more arts from Persia. This is a raitan, or it's a ceremonial drinking vessel. And just you can see that love of detail, those tiny feathers and all the curls on the mane of this lion reflect that aesthetic from this culture, this ancient Near East that includes Persia and Mesopotamia. So beautiful gold work. And just one of my favorite things. So another Persian leader, Shapur I, and apparently he defeated Valerian, a Roman, and commemorated his victory in this relief carving on a rock face in Iran in 260 CE. So it was not and this as Valerian there. And the triumph of Shapur I over Valerian. Again, another version of the they were pretty proud of it, apparently. Carving done at 260. So now we've reached the end of the ancient Near East, and this is the last slide. Every time you get to the very end of any chapter, you will see this, and eventually it will be full of human faces. The last one, of course, being something very contemporary. So that's the end of chapter 2.